This Indianomics special, Reassessing Reddy, we are speaking to Dr. Y.V. Reddy, the author of his newly brought out book, India and the Global Financial Crisis. Dr. Reddy, one of the interesting issues of your time was a perceived dissonance between central bank and the finance ministry. But very surprisingly, your last but one chapter, you have a fairly lengthy explanation that on a lot of issues, there was cooperation between government and Reserve Bank. Reading from the introduction, and if someone didn't know the last 5 years, Rip Van Winkle would assume that this is the best of relationships between central bank and finance ministry. But it was a rocky relationship.
I wouldn't call it rocky relationship. In fact, I mentioned in one of the speeches that if a central bank always agrees with the government, it is superfluous. And if it keeps disagreeing, it becomes obnoxious. But in the context, there were 2 or 3 circumstances. It's a reflection of the period, first, as far as the reality is concerned. One, when you have a semi-open capital account, the so-called trilemma.
Yes.
So either you have to resolve it or you have to manage it. In our case, we could not resolve it. It had to be managed. So once it has to be managed, there's a constant tensions between the overall public policy and the more narrow central banking. This is unique to the Indian situation. Second, in a more generalized sense, whenever the issue of monetary policy comes, there the so-called tensions were typical for any country. That is, the government has a shorter perspective, greater emphasis on growth, and so this tension arose. But one of the reasons why overall I believe that it was a very good relationship was that there were genuine differences which were sometimes argued out. But I think perhaps the markets and the media exaggerated and noticed only where there were differences. But there's a large area where we cooperated. Otherwise we couldn't have a situation. Let us accept it. Unless there is a substantive coordination and creative tension, we could not have produced a growth of 9%. We could not have produced the improvements in the banking sector. We could not have produced the financial stability. We could not have produced the price stability. So it's a combination of
Fair
creative
point. In fact,
tension.
you used the word creative tension in one of your speeches. But you also refer to the fact that once the public or the political entity has made a statement or led to a kind of market expectation, the Reserve Bank would fall in line. And you refer to how on January 23rd, 2008, June 23rd, 2008, after the double-digit inflation came in, the central government referred to monetary policy as the first line of defense, led to expectations of hike in rates, and on June 24th, indeed, the central bank raised rates because it did not want to belie the expectation that was created. Without that kind of prodding, you would not have raised rates. Do you think that the last 2 rate hikes were superfluous, that your hand was forced?
Let me put it, you see, on the run-up to what I call, where I refer to the early signs of overheating, my inclination has been generally to be slightly tighter. Okay. And in fact, I referred to it when I was leaving also. But that particular time, if you read the June 23rd statement, see, we were convinced in the Reserve Bank of India professionally that the lagged effects are going to operate, and therefore there may be no need for any monetary action. However, the argument could be made out, and as I believe it was made out, that there is also a question of inflation expectations. So our view was professionally that action may not be necessary because the lagged effects will take place. When the communication came from the public policy, on 23rd June, in a rare occasion where we made my statement was converted into a press release, where we explained the importance of lagged effects and the need to think carefully. Again, we had a situation where the financial markets did not appreciate the caution that I was trying to exercise because of whatever the expectations were built. So we had a situation where the communications from the government and the financial markets expectations together created a situation where we had to move. In fact, if you see...
But you raised rates in July also, the month after.
Yeah, the same forces operate. Okay. But if you see the June 24 statement very clearly, you will find the word inflation expectations at least 4 or 5 places. So at the end of it, if you ask me whether I could have done it or not, the issue is the question of expectations of both Whether inflation expectations will be affected or not is a matter of judgment. And when it comes to judgment, when the public policy feels strongly, and when you have to operate in coordination, at some stage you have to defer.
Yeah.
If it is reinforced to the financial markets, you have to defer. So I'm not saying...
You mean defer to the sovereign?
Yes. So what I'm saying is that sometimes there is an issue of judgment, and at that point of time, sometimes you may have to concede to the other realities.
There is one accusation, and although you have defended the way in which you grew the banking sector and its regulations, the way in which debt markets and bond markets were evolving, the constant accusation against your tenure was that you didn't allow bond markets to develop. You should have been more proactive. How would you answer that charge, or do you think you would have done it differently now?
Let me first go back to the way the markets view. If you recall, when I was the deputy governor, I was supposed to be very market friendly.
Yes.
And if you just through whether it's the government markets, say equity markets, etc. So I have no particular ideological orientation, let me put it that way. And therefore the market development will have to take into account what I may call the overall, the financial market development may be viewed by the financial sector people in the narrow financial sector perspective. But for a central bank, and from a macroeconomic angle, I have to view the developments of financial markets in the overall macro context. In the overall macro context, the government securities market is important, and I was concentrating very much on the government securities market. As far as the bond market was concerned, the domestic market was non-transparent, did not have, it was mostly private placement, and secondly, you cannot completely separate the two in some senses, and the dominant player is the government securities. So you have to concentrate on development of that, and also you have to see both supply side and demand side. People are saying that we require long-term money for infrastructure.
Yes.
That's the demand side. On the supply side, you have no long-term savings. Your insurance is not developed. Your pension funds are not developed. So what will happen? You will find only some sort of a intermediation, financial intermediation for debt markets being virtually exported.
Okay. One final question. From reading and listening to you, it feels like you have a feeling that this was a job well done to the best of your abilities. Now, after September, do you feel left out, sir?
No, on the contrary, I am very happy. And I'm doing whatever I wanted to do. So the question of being left out doesn't arise.
Thank you very much, Dr. Reddy, for sparing us time.
Thank you.
That's it on Indianomics. It's a very special edition for me. I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed speaking to Dr. Reddy. We'll meet next time with another edition of Indianomics.